加快把人民军队建成世界一流军队，是全面建设社会主义现代化国家的战略要求。全面加强人民军队、党的建设，确保枪杆子永远听党指挥。
The PLA Navy is the largest in terms of numbers of surface ships and vessels.
我们将听令而战，不辱使命，坚决挫败任何形式的外部势力和台独分裂企图。
如果要打的话，是要奉陪的，而且是可以作战到底的，可以血战到底的等等。
Many people have expressed fears that we are closer to war than we have ever been in decades. What are your thoughts on this?
I think they're right in thinking like that. I always believe the South China Sea, for example, is more dangerous than Taiwan Straits.
China's military is in a hurry. President Xi has said that the country must prepare to face dangerous storms. And he has tasked the military to achieve a set of goals by its centennial anniversary in 2027. U.S. intelligence has said that President Xi has instructed the PLA to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. But many analysts say nothing so specific has been commanded.
So when this timeline came out, it was about achieving the development of a strategic deterrence system. So the strategic deterrence capabilities, is primarily, I think, focused on sort of having high-end advanced capabilities that to deter particularly the U.S. And some of its allies from intervening. Things like nuclear, things like long-range ballistic missiles, space capabilities, and all those sort of high-end capabilities that are made for great power competition.
What is known is the PLA's goal for 2049, the year marking the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China's founding.
习主席对中国军队的要求，就是在本世纪中叶将自己转变为一支世界级的战斗力量。那世界级是什么意思呢？
世界级的就很明显，谁现在是世界级的达到世界级的这样一个水平的，那就是美军。
The Chinese military started a process of modernization when President Xi took power. In 2013, during the 12th National People's Congress, President Xi described his thinking on security.
我们越发展壮大，遇到的阻力和压力就会越大，面临的外部风险就会越多。这是我国由大向强发展进程中无法回避的挑战。
With that, President Xi ordered the PLA to modernize at speed.
同志们好！同志们辛苦了！
I think there is a prioritization of defense in Chinese policy making at the moment. And I think President Xi thinks he can bring China closer towards that goal of becoming a rejuvenated China. I think he sees himself as personally invested in that. And secondly, of course, as tensions grow, the PLA plays a really big role in upholding China's strength and power.
Xi Jinping sort of has a number of different characteristics when it comes to engaging with the PLA compared with his predecessors. First, that is that he's much more hands-on. which means that he's much more engaged in the in the minutiae of military issues. I mean, when you look at when you compare his predecessors, especially Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, they sort of attended important meetings. They sort of gave regular talks about how important the military is. But Xi Jinping, he's invested a lot more time and effort. If you look at the amount of time he goes and visits military facilities, attends military meetings, etc., he sort of significantly spent more time than compared to Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin. And also, Xi Jinping holds another title. It's the Joint Command Headquarters of the Central Military Commission, which is sort of like a sort of more of an operational command, which is a very, very significant development that his predecessors didn't have.
The PLA budget has grown annually for the last decade. In 2014, its budget was $131 billion. This year, its declared defense spending is now close to $225 billion, up 7% from last year. This is second only to the United States' nearly $886 billion budget.
The heavy investment in the PLA, especially in recent years, confirms the idea that China sees having a strong military as essential to China achieving its national goals, its aspirations. That is, China's not interested in being merely an economic superpower.
Increased funding for the Navy has enabled a shipbuilding drive that expanded the Chinese fleet rapidly. According to the Pentagon's 2022 China Military Power Report, the PLA has the biggest navy in the world. It has 340 ships. The U.S. Navy's battle force consists of 293 ships.
中国海军在近几年展开了大规模的造舰运动，这是为什么？
这个取得进步，是因为中国国内有一批学者，包括军队的领导人吧，他们就感觉到，就是中国已经从传统的农业变成了那个海洋性国家，是吧？所谓海洋性国家，就是它的生存和发展，出现了这个海上生命线这样的问题。拥有海洋，就拥有了世界，拥有了富强。300多年前，英国人突然发现这样一种认识，所谓海权意识觉醒了以后，后来英国就发展成这个日不落帝国有了那么100-200年的这样的辉煌。那么中国呢，就是在前20年的时候呢，随着改革开放随着这外向型经济这么出来以后，也需要原料也需要这个商品的那个销售市场等等。突然发现这个我们成了海洋国家，所以跟300多年前那个英国对海洋意识的这个所谓的觉醒认识是一样的。于是，你的生存依赖于这个海洋生命线的话，你必须发展海军。
One indication of naval strength: aircraft carriers. In 1999, China refurbished an old Soviet model after purchasing it secondhand, making it the country's first carrier, the Liaoning. 10 years later, in 2019, they launched their first domestically produced carrier. The Shandong uses ski jump ramps to launch fighter aircraft. By 2022, China launched its third carrier, the Fujian. It was also locally built and designed. The vessel is the first in the fleet to be equipped with an electromagnetic catapult, enabling aircraft dispatches in rapid succession. Fujian, the carrier, takes its name from Fujian, the Chinese province, located directly opposite Taiwan. The choice of this name raised many eyebrows. In barely a decade, China went from imitation to independent design, to producing its own advanced technology. Senior Colonel Zhou Bo witnessed the Navy's modernization firsthand, having personally coordinated large-scale naval exercises in the past. He is now retired from active service, but still represents China at international security conferences.
If you ask me, when is the time when PLA Navy became a blue water Navy, I would argue that is the end of 2008, when PLA flotillas were sent to Gulf of Aden for counter-piracy operations. This kind of combat mission, although against the pirates, are really a kind of military operation that we conducted far away from Chinese coast. And we had non-stop exercises, and it still is continuing. I myself have been coordinator of the Chinese Navy's counter-piracy operation from 2009 to 2015. So I know clearly how big the Chinese flotilla is, sometimes even compared with EU Atlanta or NATO's naval forces. Sometimes they only have one ship working there. After finishing the missions in the Gulf of Aden, each time, that is roughly about 3 months, then these ships would sail around the world to familiarize themselves with uncharted waters, be it in the Atlantic Ocean, be it in the Bering Sea, be it in the Mediterranean. So it's now no longer a 3-month mission, so sometimes it could even last for 10 months. So that is why we are making progress in our own way without fighting a war.
在新的时代征程上，在实现中华民族伟大复兴的奋斗中，建设强大的人民海军的任务，从来没有像今天这样紧迫。
It isn't just about firepower. China also wants an intelligent army. President Xi has called for the military to be ready for warfare that uses artificial intelligence, cloud computing, quantum computing, and the Internet of Things. For these, it needs personnel. So, it's stepping up on recruitment to draw the country's brightest young minds. As nationalist sentiment run high, Beijing has rolled out yet another 2 army recruitment programs in 2023. The Chinese military is modernizing fast, enabled by a $225 billion annual military budget. But there is a shortcoming. The army newspaper, the PLA Daily, declared in November 2022 that China lacks talent, especially in operators of new high-tech weapons systems. And so army recruiters are focusing their efforts on young graduates.
在高中的时候见到了真正的军人，在那时便发现了他们身上有一种特殊的体质。
在18岁这个年纪，是我最年轻、最气盛的年纪，我想做一些有意义的事情。
当兵是我从小的梦想，长大以后一定要成为一名军人。
我就想趁着自己年轻，改变一下自己，因为部队是每一个热血男儿都向往的地方。
似乎加入解放军是年轻毕业生的一个热门选择，这是为什么呢？
从那个，因为这个大学生就业是个很大的问题，是吧？但是你不参军，对吧？ 现在工资，是吧？调整以后你们也知道的，是吧？这个，而且他是比公务员还好，是吧？然后有保障。
The PLA gives priority to university students majoring in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And according to state broadcaster CCTV, the aim is to ensure that 70% of new recruits in 2022 hold degrees.
因为现在是高科技嘛，IT， 然后像这种电脑啊、自动化啊，是吧？等等。
退伍以后，他们是不是更有机会在国企找到工作？
服役以后退役的军人，按照国家政策，他比没有服军役的人应该有很多优惠政策的。你想想，有一个人他是没有什么没有打仗从事战争经历的，没有保家卫国过，是吧？流过血在战场上，一个是流过血的，同样大学毕业，国家要用人，首先提拔谁，是吧？
It's not just about the pay, it's the job security. And the job security is very, very important. And also, of course, the importance of patriotism and nationalism itself.
青春有很多样子，很庆幸我的青春有迷彩的样子。
我很喜欢吃部队做的饭。
Across the world, the label Strawberry Generation is often applied to those born in the 2000s. In China, the stereotypes are no different. There's even a social movement describing the practice of 躺平, literally meaning to lie flat. 躺平 refers to youth who have no ambition, refuse to put in any hard work, and just want to get by. The youth who enlist in the PLA are, of course, no strawberries.
在3000米训练中，由于我在地方上训练少，导致了掉队。班长跑过来鼓励我说，要调整呼吸，跟上节奏。运用了班长的方法，我很快跟上了队伍。
我最难忘的一次，还是我练习擒敌术的时候吧。在那个时，我的腿总是踢不高，我就告诉自己还不能放弃。到了现在，我的腿脚也踢得比以前更加直、更加高了。
The PLA's recruitment drive is working, but getting them to stay in the Army is another matter. A 2021 survey in one Army unit revealed that only 35% of undergraduates who completed their service in the PLA wanted to remain on active duty. The percentage is even lower among those who had graduated. Improving the quality of personnel in the military has long been a preoccupation of President Xi's. Here, he's speaking to student pilots at the Aviation University of the Air Force.
都是高中毕业是吧？
是。
经过培养，是吧？通过一番淘汰，剩下的也就是这么一段黄金期，要珍惜，一定要珍惜。对，我们要爱护。 要保护一个飞行员培养凝聚着党和人民期望。没有一支强大的军队，就不可能有个强大的祖国。那么强大的军队呢，是这样一步一步走过来的。从我们的军校开始，我们这个光荣传统、英雄主义精神。 必须发扬光大。有了先进的飞机、防空武器，更要有压倒敌人、不惧一切强敌的这种英勇气概，这才是我们强军的魂。希望大家再接再厉，不断努力，取得你们最光荣的业绩。
The training is rigorous, the equipment modern. But if the PLA is benchmarking itself against the American forces, as they themselves have stated, then there is another shortcoming.
Lots of experts have said that a major weakness of the PLA is that they haven't fought a war in a long time. The last time they were in active combat was in Vietnam about 40 years ago. China's leaders themselves have pointed this out as a weakness. How is this being addressed?
We understand fully how this kind of long peace might be a disadvantage for PLA training. And so that is why we actually have been very much committed to training of all sorts. For example, we have more and more joint trainings, not only if you raise example of PLA Navy, we not only have joint trainings among fleets, but we also have joint exercises among different services. And we also have conducted a lot of joint trainings with foreign armed forces, for example.
Over the years, Russia has always been the preferred joint exercise partner. August 2021. As the pandemic rages on, China held a welcoming ceremony for the Russian military team to participate in the International Army Games in Xinjiang. May 2022. As Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework in Tokyo, Russia and China engaged in a military exercise off the coast of Japan. September 2022. The Vostok military drills carried on despite the war in Ukraine. December 2022, China and Russia held a week-long joint live-fire naval exercise in the East China Sea. March 2023, China, Russia, and Iran conduct a Navy exercise near Iran's coast.
It seems like a lot of military exercises have been conducted with Russia. Why is that?
Because we are strategic partners. We do a lot of exercises with Russia, but not only with Russia. Russian military still has its own advantages because of its advanced weapon system, because of the combat experiences. Yeah, so we actually have benefited a lot from learning from Russians. But as I said before, we also did a lot of exercises with some other armed forces from which we have also drawn a lot of useful lessons.
China's strategic partnership with Russia is, of course, contentious for many in the world after the events in Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine, of course, has heightened that concern, whereby you now don't just view them as normal exercises that a military would do, but something strategic that Europe needs to be concerned about even more because there is this link with Russia. I think what we've seen is a slow expansion of these exercises that are done jointly in Northeast Asia in particular, both at sea, in the air, and on land. In the past, we saw usually that it was the former, where Russia had a leading role, and now more and more we're seeing that China is taking a leading role in some of these exercises and patrols. So in that sense, I think Europeans are going to be watching very closely.
There's a political signal, which is that China and Russia have a strong strategic partnership, that they're a solid bloc. They're friends, they have common goals, and to work against those common goals is more formidable, taking both of them on simultaneously. It also suggests, it hints that if someone is to get into a war with China, they might have to deal with Russia also.
China's foreign minister used his annual press conference to elaborate on the importance of China's relationship with Russia.
中俄携手世界多极化和国际关系民主化就有了动力，全球战略平衡和稳定就多了保障。世界越是动荡不安，中俄关系就越要稳步前行。
The 4th Company of the 75th Brigade has a practice of standing before an old belt during major exercises in order to commemorate an event that happened 87 years ago. This belt was worn by a PLA soldier in 1936 during the Long March, when the PLA endured death and starvation and still continued on their mission to regroup with Mao Zedong. The PLA had suffered severe losses under the gunfire of the Kuomintang, who were armed with more advanced weapons imported from the United States. Tens of thousands of Mao's Red Army died. But they managed to turn the tables later and defeat the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang escaped to Taiwan and set up government there.
那个时候武器嘛，大家也差不多，就打个平手，对吧？但是你如果境界高，精神力量不来了以后，有一种使命感，对吧？那你就不怕死了。你整个一个人不怕死，整个一个群体一支军队不怕死的话，你就压到对方了。在落后的武器装备的情况下，那你这个思想觉悟高的这个有精神力量很塑造的很好的军队，那你就无敌于天下。所以这是我们甚至于可以弥补武器的不足。为什么国民党武器那么好？中国共产党军队能够夺得天下能够战胜国民党军队，一切是那个思想政治教育。
All that happened nearly a century ago, but that story is still highly relevant, and it is reprised in the PLA every day.
那么你要重新建设、塑造这支部队的魂的话，精神建设的话，就要强调这个东西。所以那个战士说：“我要是留下半根皮带，要到延安给毛主席。”这实际上就表达了这支军队必须对党的领导人要忠诚，要敬仰。
习主席叮嘱大家要发掘好、运用好部队的红色资源，加强党史、军史和光荣传统教育，确保官兵永远听党话、跟党走。我们一定要按照习主席教导的那样，把理想信念的火种、红色传统的基因一代代传下去。
习主席强调，我军之所以能够战胜各种艰难困苦，不断从胜利走向胜利，最根本的就是坚定不移听党话、跟党走，这是我军的军魂和命根子，永远不能变，永远不能丢。
Military experts point out that there's an extensive emphasis on political indoctrination and ideology training in the PLA that you don't find in non-party militaries.
Ideology basically is like a belief. Yeah, it's almost something religious. So for PLA officers and men, it's not only about fighting, but you should know for whom you fight and what you stand for. And this kind of belief actually, I would say, is very much a plus for your even combat capabilities. Because you see, if you fight for a purpose, then you are much more brave. Yeah, then you become much more powerful. Yeah, because you have a purpose. And in life, we need to have a purpose.
The mission of the People's Liberation Army is to protect the position and the interest of the party. This is acknowledged by both the PLA and the party itself. It's understood that if there's a conflict of interest between the interest of the country as a whole and the Communist Party, then the PLA should side with the party. If there's a conflict between the people of China, average folks, and the party, then the People's Liberation Army is expected to side with the party. We saw what that could look like in the Tiananmen incident of 1989.
Our militaries are loyal to the country. Of course, in the PLA's instance, it is the party's army. And so it's the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. So in that sense, it's not so surprising that there is an emphasis on loyalty to the party.
Loyalty to the party was one key message that was sent by the PLA during its most significant exercise to date. And that was on the 4th of August, 2022, when Nancy Pelosi paid Taiwan a visit.
我们敢于亮剑，敢于斗争，敢于胜利，坚决完成党和人民赋予的各项任务。我们坚决做到炮听我的话，我听党的话。
During the exercise, the PLA sent about 100 fighter jets and bombers to Taiwan's so-called airspace. During the drills, the Eastern Theater Command also deployed more than 10 destroyers and frigates in the waters around Taiwan.
8月份的这个演习，它是一种表达，一种决心的表达，对吧？这种表达就这决心的内容就是说，我如果要打的话是要奉陪的，而且是可以作战到底的，可以血战到底的等等。
So what I think I took away from the exercises following Nancy Pelosi's visit was, one, a willingness, of course, to act militarily in a fashion that China hasn't done for a very long time. And of course, a reflection of the confidence that bestows on the PLA and its capabilities at this point in time as well. In 1996, the last time we saw the use of missiles in this fashion, a number of the missiles failed. This time, the missiles didn't fail. And so there is a reflection of how much more advanced the PLA's military technological capability has become.
In April 2023, when President Tsai visited the U.S., China simulated precision attacks and blockades of Taiwan. The scale of this exercise was smaller compared to the exercise in August 2022. President Xi has said repeatedly that reunification with Taiwan is China's destiny, and he doesn't mince his words.
我们坚持以最大诚意 尽最大努力，争取和平统一的前景，但绝不承诺放弃使用武力，保留采取一切必要措施的选项。
Unfortunately, the party has defined China in such a way that the party should be considered a failure, according to the party's own verbiage. If it fails to in effect, annex Taiwan as a province of the People's Republic of China. It didn't need to be this way, but the party has defined itself into this terrible situation.
In a desert in northwest China, a missile brigade of the PLA rocket force is on a live fire drill. They're firing new missiles with advanced warheads, enabling accurate hits on targets hundreds of kilometers away. These men have been tasked to take half the usual time to carry out a missile launching.
快速反应能力的话，主要研究了咱们导弹武器根据现有的情况，它的技术流程是否有压缩的可行性。第二一个的话是 加大对咱们平时发射单元的训练，重点是从难从严训练，提高我们一岗的发射单元号手的操作的精准度。
Mission accomplished.
在未来的战场上吧，应该是会发挥得更好。
In other desert locations, China is building more than 100 new silos for intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. That's according to reports from security analysts released in 2022. For years, China maintained a minimal nuclear arsenal with only about 20 ICBMs, while Russia and the US had thousands of nuclear warheads. This is now rapidly changing. A Pentagon report states that China now has more than 400 nuclear warheads, approximately doubling its nuclear arsenal in just 2 years. And China could have 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035.
中国为什么在扩大自己的核力量？
这个没办法，这也是现实情况，也确实如此。你比如俄罗斯现在，对吧，在常规战场上打成这个样子，出乎他意料，对吧？不顺利。如果他没有原子弹的话，他没有核武器的话，他现在会怎么样？有用的，至少你不敢直接出兵。 至少你给武器的时候，你也得掂量掂量，不能给最好的武器，对吧？一点点挤牙膏这么给，是吧？还有就是你要他的命， 想把它像希特勒一样的，以后搞个什么审判啊，什么什么的，上法庭弄得什么萨达姆、什么卡扎菲这样的下场，他可能能保证这个不部核武器，保证他失败的一方可以不会这个政治领袖人物不能落得这么一个下场，国家也不会被这个完全被四分五裂，是吧？
China is currently undergoing what for China is quite a large and dramatic expansion of its nuclear arsenal. But I would not consider this an aggressive action by China, because the Chinese are starting at such a low level with such a small number of nuclear weapons that even with a rapid expansion, a large expansion, they will achieve only a partial catch-up with the two nuclear superpowers, the USA and Russia. Specifically, China now has 400 nuclear warheads. They might have 1,500 by the year 2035. But the United States and Russia both have over 5,000. Having said that, there are some ways that this still increases geopolitical tensions. From the point of view of most of the rest of the world, any of those three countries having a lot more nuclear warheads is not a positive thing.
China has consistently said that it has a no first use nuclear policy.
China is the only country that actually has committed itself to this no first use nuclear policy. Basically, in China, we believe nuclear weapons are just for deterrence purposes. You should not really use nuclear weapons. So if you have nuclear warheads that you believe are enough for self-defense, then that is enough. Then the question is, how many is enough? That is a big question, because the international situation is changing. And so your adversaries, your competitors' military capabilities are also changing. So in spite of a much smaller nuclear arsenal, we have to make sure that they are effective. And they have to evolve with the strategies of other countries. So we cannot make it static. So I understand that there are a lot of foreign medias or even reports from the Pentagon talking about China's large increase of nuclear warheads. I'm not in a position to confirm that or deny that. But I just want to say that if you have a kind of weapon system, you have to make sure that they can work.
An ever-increasing budget, an ever-enlarging recruitment drive, a continual focus on combat readiness. But who does China perceive as a threat? While never explicitly stated by President Xi, there have been a number of speeches by other Chinese leaders, criticizing the U.S. for its actions on Taiwan, its military presence in the Indo-Pacific region, its security partnership with Australia, India, and Japan, known as the Quad, and its partnership with Australia and the UK, known as AUKUS. The possibility of accidents leading to escalation is ever increasing. In May 2022, Australia's Defense Department said that a Chinese fighter aircraft flew close in front of the Australian aircraft and released a bundle of chaff containing small pieces of aluminum that were ingested into the Australian aircraft's engine. In June, Canada's military accused Chinese warplanes of harassing its patrol aircraft as they monitored North Korea sanctioned evasions. Both events took place in the South China Sea. Then, on the 29th of December 2022, the U.S. military said a Chinese military plane came within 3 meters of a U.S. Air Force aircraft in the contested South China Sea and forced it to take evasive maneuvers to avoid a collision in international airspace. The close encounter came after what the U.S. called a recent trend of increasingly dangerous behavior by Chinese military aircraft. The PLA quickly countered with its own video and said it was the U.S. aircraft, not the Chinese one, that was flying dangerously. The world was just a few meters away from a major crisis.
This is a very complicated issue, but I can make it simple. All these things happened very much close to China or simply in China's, exclusive economic zone. So they are not happening, somewhere near Hawaii. It's not near Brisbane, for example. So this is the fact.
But it is debatable whether or not the South China Sea is in China's exclusive economic zone, because Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, they all have claims to the area as well.
I understand what you said, but, the United States is an outsider of this issue. And this is an issue between China and some claimants of the South China Sea. We are committed to negotiate a solution through peaceful means. Think about the military strength of China. Think about the fact that we, being so strong, are still talking about resolving this issue peacefully. We have demonstrated what we are sincere to find a peaceful solution. But this has nothing to do with Americans' provocation, as we see it.
Many people have expressed fears that we are closer to war than we have ever been in decades. What are your thoughts on this?
I think they're right in thinking like that. I always believe the South China Sea, for example, is more dangerous than Taiwan Straits. Why? Because people thought, okay, there might be a war in Taiwan Strait, but the problem is, in Taiwan Strait, a war would not be triggered by an accident. There are so many satellites watching, there are so many radars watching the situation. Even a few words made by President Biden have to be interpreted by himself and by his aide. So that means everybody's concerned with the issue. That means this issue actually may not explode so easily. But think of South China Sea. We have already have some accidents before, like the collision aircraft, like the very close encounter between ships. And the problem is, how can we resolve this issue? China talks about competence building measures. President Biden talks about guardrails. Yeah, it's fine. Both sides have a joint wish not to have a conflict. But the question is how to avoid it. My question is also an answer. It's very simple. If you do not want the water to boil, why would you throw wood into the fire?
There are crisis control mechanisms in place. There are hotlines. There are agreed upon rules, and they don't work. And the reason they don't work is because the United States and China think of crisis control in very different ways. So from the American side, crisis control is something to be kept separate from the bilateral relationship. That is, whether bilateral relations are good or bad, there should always be robust crisis control. It's too important, even when relations are bad, not to make sure that isn't taken care of. From the Chinese point of view, however, crisis control is linked to bilateral relations. So from the Chinese point of view, if bilateral relations are bad, if China has a complaint about American policies, then crisis control should be one of the levers of pressure that the Chinese can use on the Americans. So we continue to have problems. When the United States uses the hotline and calls China, the Chinese don't pick up the phone.
If crisis control mechanisms don't work, then is conflict inevitable?
They want to be prepared for war, and they want to be seen to be strong. But I don't think they actually really want to go to war. Xi Jinping is far more pragmatic. One case I always tell my students is, look what happened in 2019 when you had these protests in Hong Kong. There was a concern that they could easily send in the troops, and they were sort of like amassing troops in Shenzhen. But what was the final response? The Chinese leadership didn't send in the tanks. They didn't send in the military. They used sort of governance means. They set up sort of a national security law. They used legal means to sort of clamp down on that. And to me, that sort of seems to show that it's like it's not the actual use of force. it's like they're sending a deterrence message, but also finding ways to meet your objectives of actually going to war. This is sort of the raison d'etre of what this Xi Jinping regime is.
从双方这个国内的那个被那个疫情的都搞得那个焦头烂额吧，是吧？一大堆事情啊，这产业链啊、经济啊，双方都有各种问题，都应付不过来了。所以从根本上来讲，对吧？中美之间他们是不想开战的。那么这个是个大背景，在这样一个大背景之下，哪怕就是说演习威慑的程度很多，有各种惊险的这种场面出现，就像12月中美飞机在南海，这种基本上都属于表达。
目前上有经济的考虑，不过如果这种摩擦继续，那过了4、5年，我们会不会看到战争爆发呢
？4、5年以后，就要看哪一方那个有这种打的愿望，是吧？要看愿望，这个是确实不好说。